morning. Some people make a lot of money over their career. Some people lose a lot of money. And some people do both. Some people do both very quickly. Manaus has seen it all. I want you to meet some of the people responsible for the rise and fall of this boom and bust city in the middle of the rainforest. A funny place to build a city, right? Well, it's all here because of rubber. Long before Europeans turned up, indigenous communities already knew all about the latex from the Javier brasiliensis tree. They didn't call it rubber, of course. They just knew it was handy. They'd cut the bark, collect the white sap, and use it to make waterproof balls or sandals, bottles, and waterproof cloth. Simple, smart, sustainable. Well, when the Spanish and the Portuguese explorers arrived in the 1500s, they saw this strange, bouncy substance that looked like dried milk. But they didn't really know what to do with it. One Jesuit priest in 1736 described people using it to make shoes and bouncing balls, and he was amazed. And that's the first recorded European account of Amazonian rubber. Though the word rubber itself came later, actually from England. In the 1770s, scientists in London discovered that this South American substance could rub out pencil marks. So they started calling it India rubber, even though it has nothing to do with India and everything to do with the Amazon. But this pencil-erasing substance was still something of a quiet discovery until the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution. And suddenly, rubber was in demand. So by the late 1800s, Manaus was booming. And not just doing well kind of booming. This was a Wild West gold rush style of money, except the gold was white and sticky. Rubber was everything. It was in tires, hoses, wires, raincoats, you name it. And the Amazon was the only place on Earth with the right kind of tree. So suddenly, the jungle made people rich, very rich. And one of those people was Waldemar Scholz. Waldemar Scholz was a German businessman who arrived in Brazil during the second half of the 19th century. Not much is known about his early years, but the 1890s, he'd struck lucky. Very lucky. He jumped into the rubber trade just as the world's appetite for the stuff was exploding. But what did Waldemar Scholz actually do, besides building a palace for himself in the middle of a jungle? Which we'll get onto that in a moment. Well, like any good baron, he didn't tap the rubber trees himself. He built a business empire on other people's backs, mainly indigenous laborers and poor migrants, while he ran the operation from the comfort of his estate. And here's how it worked. Back in the rubber boom days, which is roughly 1879 to 1912, rubber wasn't farmed in neat rows like it is today. The trees grew wild in the jungle. They were scattered over huge distances. So to get the latex, you needed men, lots of them, willing to go deep into the rainforests for weeks at a time, hacking into trees with knives, collecting the saps in little cups. This sap was then smoked over fires to turn it into little rubber balls for shipping. The whole process was slow, hot, full of insects. It was dangerous. Scholz made money by financing and controlling the whole supply chain. He owned or leased vast tracts of rainforest land filled with rubber trees. Then, using a system called the aviamento, he provided workers called seringueiros with all of the gear that they needed: hammocks, tools, food, even clothes. But here's the catch. They didn't get that for free. That was all on credit. And by the time they brought back the rubber, they often owed more than they had earned. That debt system kept them tied to the job, sometimes for life. It's often compared to indentured servitude. In some areas, especially deeper upriver, the system was even more brutal, involving forced labor of indigenous people backed by violence and private militias. Now, while there's no direct record linking Scholz personally to these abuses, he operated in a system that was built on exploitation. Once the rubber made it back to Manaus, Scholz exported it downriver, mostly to Europe and the US, where it was used for tires, thanks Mr. Dunlop, hoses, cables, waterproof goods. And he got paid in hard currency: dollars, pounds, marks, and lots of them. And he wasn't just making a bit of money off the top. Rubber sold for more than gold, pound for pound. And someone like Scholz, with access to land, labor, and shipping networks, could scale that up fast. And when you've got that much money, it gets really heavy in your pocket. So obviously, you need to build yourself a palace. And not just any palace. So in 1903, he began building what became known as the Palacio Scholz, right in the heart of Manaus. Now, this wasn't some rustic Amazonian hut. No. This was full-on European grandeur. Scholz imported Italian marble, French mirrors, Scottish cast iron, and he hired the best builders money could buy. The result? A full-blown palace in the middle of a rainforest. It had a grand staircase, painted ceilings, carved wooden doors, the works. It was a place to show off wealth, to entertain guests, and to say without words, "Yes, I've made it." And Scholz had made it. But it wouldn't last long. By 1918, he'd lost his palace to the governor of Amazonas, and it was renamed Palacio Rio Negro, after the river that snakes past the city. How did Scholz come to lose so much? And by the way, he was far from the only one here. Well, in a way, you could say that he was the victim of theft. His riches were stolen from right under his nose. You could almost feel sorry for him if he hadn't been doing the exact same thing to the indigenous people he had toiling away in the rainforest in credit-line clothes. But the way it all happened is like something out of a spy novel. I'll tell you how the rug was pulled out from under his feet. After we open the portal and collect our next port of call, the rainforest city, Manaus. Manaus is one of those places that sounds made up. An opera house in the middle of the Amazon, once richer than London, now wrapped in jungle silence. It's a city that boomed on the back of rubber trees and champagne dreams and then busted when the world moved on. But it's still here. It's still breathing under the weight of history and humidity. You're going to feel it in the air. This is the kind of place where the past isn't gone, it's just a little overgrown. Manaus isn't polished, but it's got stories in every crack. We're going to get off the ship onto this pier, and then you take a shuttle bus up that road that you can see just going off to the left, and then that's going to take you to the port exit area, a little terminal area. You can't walk in the port facility, so everybody's going to need to take that shuttle bus up the road there. Once you get into the port facility itself, you've got a little souvenir shopping area, tourist information there, taxis wait just outside, there's very patchy Wi-Fi, really quite bad Wi-Fi. And then there is some money, ATM machines. I would suggest that you walk past these ATM machines and you go to 2 roads up where there is a bank called the Bank of Brazil. You're going to get a much better exchange rate from that one. You pay for convenience in the port, but that convenience is quite expensive. So you've got 2 options. You have got ATM machines in the port. Your transaction fee is much larger than if you walk 2 blocks in and then you get to a Bank of Brazil. Here is a map of where we're going to be docked, and then you can see the shuttle bus is where the port terminal area is, and the city itself is pretty close by. Now, it spreads wider. There are things that you might want to go further afield, but if you're wanting to stay relatively local, you're going to have a great time here within a 1 kilometer or 15 to 20 minute walk. All right, let's get into our top 10. I'm going to start with the Teatro Amazonas. It's one of those places that makes you do a double take, because right there in the middle of the Amazon, you've got an opera house topped with a candy-colored dome and all. And this was built during that rubber boom where local millionaires were trying to outdo Europe. It's got marble from Italy, chandeliers from France, ironwork from Scotland, everything. Nothing was too much. You walk in and you think, really? Here? But that's Manaus for you. It's a bit over the top and a bit faded around the edges now, but it is still standing proud and well worth a look. This, for me, is the top highlight of this city. It's a magnificent place. And they say that the acoustics in here are so good that you could hear a pin drop. Not when we're in. All right. The Mercado Municipal Aldolfo Lisboa. It's a mouthful, isn't it? This is Manaus' answer to a proper old-fashioned market. A bit chaotic, a bit charming, full of things you didn't know you needed. It's got that... but I know you need them. It's got that classic iron and glass structure. It's almost like a greenhouse in parts. It was supposedly inspired by Les Halles, which is in Paris. It's definitely more Amazon than arrondissement, but inside you're going to find everything from giant river fish to herbal remedies to baskets that you couldn't get at home if you tried. Local shop here. Tourists wander around wide-eyed and they hit by the smell of spices and fruit the minute you walk in. It is a bit crowded. It's definitely a little bit warm, but it's full of life. If you want a proper slice of Manaus, then this is it. And there's the palace. Palacio Rio Negro. Looks like the sort of house that you'd build if rubber had made you rich overnight. Which, in Waldemar Scholz's case, it of course had. It was built in 1903. This became his private mansion. And it later became the seat of government. And nowadays it's a cultural centre that's open to visitors. And the place has been through a few changes over the years. But the grand staircase, the painted ceilings, the polished floors still hint at how big that boom once was. It's not just a pretty building. This is a bit of Manaus history wrapped up in wood and stone, and it is well worth popping in for a look. The Palacete Provincial. It looks like a grand old colonial building, and it is. But what's inside might surprise you. It was built in 1874, and it was once the headquarters of the Amazonas military police. But now it holds 4 small museums all under one roof. So there's a coin collection with over 35,000 pieces. There's a gallery full of Amazonian and international art. There's a display of vintage radios and cameras, including one of the first projectors in the Amazon. And then there's even a museum of old police gear. So this is a really interesting place to visit. It's free, it's easy to explore, it's right by Heliodoro Balbi Square. It's perfect, therefore, for a sit down afterwards or a wander inside. So a really great spot. The cathedral in Manaus doesn't really try to outshine the jungle. This is simple, it's solid, it's quietly elegant. And you'll find it just up from the river, looking out over the city with its twin towers and this pastel yellow on the walls. It was built on the site of a former fort, and so it's been around in some form since the 1600s. But today's version that you can visit dates to the 19th century. Inside, it's cool, it's calm, they've got stained glass, wooden pews. Locals still pop in to light candles or sit for a moment. It's not grand like the opera houses, but it is still part of Manaus through and through. So this is the Jungle Warfare Training Center. or SIGs for short. This isn't your usual tourist stop, but it is one of those only in Manaus places. This is run by the Brazilian army, where soldiers train to survive the Amazon, and there is a small zoo out front that is open to the public. So you'll see jaguars, monkeys, birds, all native to the rainforest. Unless you're planning to join the Brazilian army, the training at SIGs is strictly off limits to the public. It is one of the toughest jungle warfare schools in the world, and the soldiers there go through serious survival training. Think machetes, camouflage, days without food. And visitors cannot join in. But you can visit the small public zoo that's attached to the centre, which shows off some of the region's wildlife and gives you a taste, though a very mild one, of the environment that these soldiers train in. And if you are heading out that way, then you've got a couple of other things that you could consider before heading back to the centro. And one of them is the Arena da Amazonia. This is a massive football stadium. It was built for the 2014 World Cup, and it was later used during the Rio 2016 Olympics. The Olympic rings are still out front, just in case you forget that this place once hosted the world. It doesn't get packed often these days, but it is still used for local matches and events. But even empty, it's impressive. This huge modern arena surrounded by rainforest, like somebody dropped it in by helicopter. It's so out of place. And if you're looking for the best shopping mall in town, then also out in that direction, Manaus shopping is the one that locals will point you to. It's big, it's modern, and most importantly, it's air-conditioned. You'll find your usual mix of international brands, Brazilian shops, a decent food court, even a cinema if you fancy putting your feet up. One nice touch, they have built this around a patch of preserved rainforest. So you see the real jungle right through the glass walls as you're going shopping. It's clean, it's well run, it's easy to get to. Not the cheapest place in town, but if you do need a few bits or you just want to wander, then this place works well. Back to the center. The Museu do Índio is a quiet little spot that's easy to miss, but it's worth popping into if you're nearby. It's run by a group of missionary nuns, and it focuses on the culture, crafts, and daily life of the indigenous peoples from across the Amazon. So don't expect fancy displays or interactive screen. It's much more old school than that. But you'll find cases of tools, clothing, pottery, photos. It's a respectful and informative look at communities that have lived in the rainforest long before Manaus was ever a thing. It's not going to take long, maybe half an hour, but you'll leave knowing a little bit more than you did when you went in. And we'll finish back right where we started. Praça São Sebastião. It's one of those places where you can happily sit with a coffee and just watch the world go by. And it is right there in front of the Teatro Amazonas. There's a lovely little church on one side and colonial buildings all around. And the square's paved in a wave pattern that's meant to look like something of a meeting of the rivers. And there's always a bit of life to it there. Street performers or kids playing or tourists snapping photos. There are shops around, cafes, the Galleria do Lago, which has a rotation of local art on display. And it's central, it's easy, it's a great place to just take a pause. So here are our top 10 on a map. And all the ones that are actually on the map without the arrow pointing out to them are walkable if you enjoy a walk in the hot and humid temperatures with a few mosquitoes accompanying you for the ride. By the end of our time in the Amazon, some of you will find that your ears are double the size of what they are now. It's quite useful if you find you're ever in hard of hearing. You can hear a lot more after a visit to the Amazon. You look a little bit like Dumbo. But it's just a reminder to please start wearing your bug spray. Whether it's a spray, a patch, a band, that doesn't matter, but start wearing something that is going to ward them off, because you'll see plenty of them. Alrighty. So, We left the rubber baron Waldemar Scholz at the point where he lost all of his fortune and he vanished from Manaus. Let's find out why. Did the world go off rubber? Not at all. In fact, the opposite. Rubber's success continued elsewhere. But the Havia brasiliensis tree, the main source of natural rubber, was endemic to the Amazon rainforest. It's native to this area, and until the late 19th century, it was only found here. So Brazil had a global monopoly on this stuff. But then a certain Englishman came to visit, a man called Sir Henry Wickham. Now, depending on who you ask, he was either a bold British adventurer or the man who stole Brazil's future. You've possibly never heard of him, but this one man changed the world. Wickham turned up in the Amazon in the 1870s. He wasn't a scientist, not really. He was more of a professional wanderer with an eye for opportunity. But he wasn't just some rogue explorer with a backpack and a dream. He had connections, and most importantly, he had a mission. He was in touch with Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker, the director of Kew Gardens in London at the time. Hooker was a serious player in the world of imperial botany. He believed in what you might call strategic gardening, basically using plants to expand the British Empire's economic reach. Spices, tea, quinine, cotton, and yes, rubber. So Wickham wrote to Kew offering his services as a collector. And Hooker, keen to break Brazil's monopoly, approved the mission. It wasn't exactly shouted from the rooftops, but it was no accident. Wickham even received a small official grant to cover his expenses. Think of it as the 19th century version of a quiet government contract. Actually, think of it as biopiracy. And Wickham very well knew that. In his memoirs, Stray Leaves from the Jungle, published in 1909, he recounts, "I was collecting the seeds with a view to sending them to England, and I knew full well that I was treading on dangerous ground. Yet I felt assured of my success." He doesn't sound too concerned about the ethics of his actions, just about getting the job done. And why? By transferring the cultivation of the rubber tree to our colonies, we would open up a vast new industry for the empire, which would benefit all concerned. All concerned. Once Wickham collected the seeds in 1876, about 70,000 of them, he shipped them from Santarém to Liverpool on board a steamship. And Wickham was so proud of this part. "I concealed the seeds in the most ingenious manner, and after a long voyage, I arrived in England with the precious cargo." They were labeled innocently as botanical specimens from Amazon Valley, and nobody stopped them at customs. From there, they went to Kew, and Hooker had them germinated with care. Now, the seeds were sprouted at Kew and sent off to British colonies, mainly Ceylon and Malaya. They were then grown in tidy plantation rows. No jungle, no mosquitoes, no wandering through a rainforest with a machete, just neat, industrialized rubber. The result? Asia took over the rubber trade and the Amazon's economy collapsed. Towns like Manaus, once rolling in money, suddenly had opera houses and marble staircases, but no income to keep the lights on. How did Wickham sum up his actions? "I did what I believed to be right. The results have justified the action." The results? Well, Wickham was knighted for services to science, very euphemistic, and Brazil's rubber industry collapsed. Manaus went from being richer than London to switching off the electricity because they couldn't afford to run the generators. It's a low point in British-Brazilian relations, but for most of the 1800s, Britain and Brazil had what you might call a polite but self-interested friendship. Britain was Brazil's biggest trading partner for much of that century. British companies built Brazil's first railways, installed telegraph lines, invested heavily in their banking and infrastructure. There was even a British-owned gas company that was lighting the streets of Manaus before London had electric streetlights. Britain was quick to recognize Brazilian independence after Brazil declared independence from Portugal in 1822, but that didn't stop them from a fair amount of imperial elbowing. By the 1870s, when Henry Wickham arrived on the scene, the relationship was strictly economic, but Britain still held the upper hand. Brazil needed foreign capital. Britain wanted rubber. And though Brazil had laws against exporting rubber seeds, they had very little ability to enforce them. Now, I don't want to come across as a biopiracy apologist here, nor do I particularly want you to feel pity for the rubber barons of Manaus losing their vast fortune, because in a way, they were pirates too. But just think, the indigenous people of the Amazon knew about rubber and how to use it for centuries. They'd discovered how to tap the trees, how to boil down the sap, and how to apply their creation. All the Europeans really knew was how to make money out of it. History is written by the victor, and so we're often left with a somewhat one-sided view of things. But thinking about it, when you take away the money from Manaus, who really lost here? Because it wasn't the indigenous Amazonians. It was the European barons who came to extract not rubber, but money. I guess it's true when they say, you get what you give.